Roaming in Siege is the most misunderstood role in the game, which is why in today's video I'll be going over the 4 levels of roaming in Rainbow Six Siege so you can get better at it. The first level of which being going for kills. Most people go for kills when roaming, but you don't have to do this. You need to think of roaming as maintaining space and map control much more than just getting kills, but until then, most people don't escape this stage, the first stage. At this stage, you mostly use operators like Caveira and Vigil, even if you don't get value out of them, purely because you don't really know the game. You don't have a lot of map knowledge or game sense, probably because you're new or because you just don't know how to roam properly, but that's okay. This is the only role that you know to get kills, which is probably why you're playing the role. Ironically, this isn't even true, but that's something we'll go over a little bit later. This is the first stage that most people are in. Given that the average player base is high silver and low gold, it makes sense that the majority of players who are even watching this video would be at the first stage, and that is fine. If you're roaming in the first place, then you know what roaming and anchoring is, which is even ahead of some other players in the player base. So don't get me wrong, you're not a bad player, you just have a little bit to learn, which I can hopefully teach you in today's video. One thing that you need to understand about roaming is that there is a time and a place when you can roam for kills. It is viable to roam if you want to get kills, but that isn't your primary objective, which is again something we'll talk about later. If you're roaming to get kills, that is fine, but you need to learn when to do it and when not to do it. So, for example, you want to be doing it on smaller maps, because if you're roaming, chances are they're going to come to you and try to take the room that you're in a lot earlier, because there's just less rooms that they have to clear for a roamer, which means you're going to have to be more aggressive to hold those rooms if you want to do a successful roam. So maps like Border or Coastline, it's okay to roam for kills and get aggressive, but a map like Nighthaven Labs or a map like Clubhouse or Oregon that are a little bit bigger, it's not okay to do this, and you'll do something else that I'll talk about in stage 2 or 3. Not only this, but there's certain differences in maps depending on how much utility is used. Clubhouse is a great example of a map where you need a lot of utility on the board. If you want to take CC, you typically need at least 2 hard breachers. If you want to take gym, you probably need 3. If you want to take basement, you need vert and hard breachers and a roam clear, right? Whereas Coastline, you don't need to get a wall open. You don't need any really specific utility at all. So it's okay to go for kills and not really worry about the game sense part of the map as much. So if you're trying to roam and you're on the first stage of roaming and you don't really know what you're doing, maybe you're new to the game or you're just uneducated, I would definitely recommend, at least for you, only roaming on certain specific maps that are close, that you don't have to use utility on. That way you can at least be good at roaming on those maps and save roaming for maps later on that aren't as utilityless when you get better at roaming in the first place. If you want to get better at roaming, then this brings me into the second level of roaming in Rainbow Six Siege. The second level of roaming is roaming for time. This is the level that most content creators, including myself, and high-level players are at, or at least know about. Commonly, you'll hear people, especially content creators, say that roaming is for wasting time, not for getting kills. Even I've said this in the past. Now, this is true, but only to an extent, and it isn't really the whole picture of what roaming is and how to roam effectively. However, if you were to roam to waste time, you'd still be very useful for your team. So if you don't know what to do, just wasting time in general is going to be your best bet 9 times out of 10. At this point, you're probably playing roamers like Solus and Mozzie, who excel at wasting information and drones, which in turn wastes time. Now, like I said, this is the part of roaming that most people in the Siege community are at, because this is how they understand roaming to be. I think pro players are a little bit beyond this level, but anybody else under that is at this level. And if you're at part 2, which you probably are, even if you're a champion, that's okay. You can actually stay at this part your entire Siege career and be an effective roamer. Stage 3 and 4 are just extra cherries on top if you want to be a really, really, really good roamer, but if you're at stage 2, that's okay. The reason that wasting time is a lot better when you're roaming than getting kills would be is because if you're wasting time, you make it to where once they actually roam clear you and kill you, or at least push you back to site, they have no time to get the bomb down, to get walls open, to get vert, or do anything of the sort in order to pressure your anchors. So roaming to waste time is actually extremely viable. Now, just like roaming to get kills is very map dependent, so is roaming to waste time. Roaming to waste time on bigger maps is a lot easier to do, and you're a lot more passive when you do it, because if they have to clear 15 different rooms in order to get to the bomb site and multiple floors in between, then you can waste a lot more time just by shooting drones and letting them have a few rooms than you would if you had to take some gunfights. Now, on a map like Border or like Skyscraper or like Coastline, where they're a bit smaller and you don't have as many rooms that you can take in order to roam clear, then roaming for time becomes a lot harder. And if you want to waste time, you have to actually hold the room that you're sitting in and go for gunfights, or waste time in a bit more aggressive manner and not just shoot drones and back up, but maybe shoot drones and reposition in the same room that you're already in. So even though it is a little map dependent on your playstyle when you're roaming to waste time, it doesn't matter what map you're on if you want to actually waste time on the roam. You just have to play it a little bit differently. But roaming to waste time, you can do on every single map that you want to. Again, you just have to do it a little bit different depending on the size of the map. Now, the third level of roaming is even more complicated, and most people don't even know about it, which is roaming for space and map control. Quick disclaimer, if I say space, I'm just referring to map control. Space is just easier to say, which is why I say space instead of map control. With that out of the way, why is roaming for map control, or space, better than roaming for kills and time? It's better than roaming for either of those things because if they are pushing the site, your roam is completely useless. The only way to stop this is to put yourself in between the rooms that they're pushing from and the room that your team is in. So naturally, maintaining control of these rooms, or space, is going to be the most advantageous way to roam for your team at all times. Of course, except for my last level of roaming, but we'll get to that in a second. You can try to get kills on the roam. You can try to waste time on the roam and do both of these things effectively. But if they're not pushing where you're roaming, none of it actually matters. Not only this, but if you're wasting a lot of time and you're getting a lot of kills, if you're giving up a lot of space while you're doing it in the first place, it's not going to matter. Let's go to top floor of coastline. Let's say they're defending the kitchen. If you're roaming and you're getting kills onto people who are inside of theater, who are inside of hookah, but they still gained all of the space in VIP and penthouse to make a vert with a ram, your roam, as cool as it was getting kills and wasting a little bit of time, still gave up all the space that they needed to make your roam completely useless, which is why roaming for map control is much more important than roaming for time or for kills. I think playing the game with map control and taking and maintaining space in mind is the most underrated tip, but arguably the most useful and advanced tip that I could ever give you on this YouTube channel. Hands down, this is the most important tip I'm ever going to give you. If you want to get better at this game, better than the above average player, you have to think of this game as a space game, as taking control of rooms and maintaining control of rooms. If you're an attacker, taking control of the room by droning somebody out and killing them so you have that room is very important. If you're a defender, making sure that you can roam and stay in that room and maintain that room, especially on closer maps, is important if you want to roam correctly. Doing that not only will ensure that you have an effective roam, but doing that in turn also wastes time, which further reinforces the fact that roaming for space and map control is super, super, super important. But with that out of the way, let's get into the final level of roaming. The best and hardest level of roaming that almost nobody on planet Earth is at, but you could get to if you tried hard enough. Now, you might be wondering what could possibly be the best and final way to roam. Well, it's actually pretty simple for how complicated it is, ironically. It's doing all three at once. Doing any of the three previous steps are actually viable, but they're specifically viable if you know when to implement them. For instance, on larger maps, like I said, wasting time is much more valuable than holding rooms and holding map control, where on certain maps, it's actually better to get kills than to maintain space because there's no important space to hold. So the best way to roam is to know when specifically to implement each of the three previous levels of roaming. You need to know when it's actually more important to get a kill than it is to waste time or to hold space as a roamer. Or you need to know when it's time to switch it up and maybe waste time more than holding space or more than getting a kill. Or you need to know when to switch it up whenever you're trying to hold map control more than you're actually trying to waste time and get kills. All three you can do viably, and they are pretty situational, but if you know when to implement each three, because like I said, each three is viable, then you will be the best roamer on the planet Earth. This is a level that I'm not even at. So if you're not there, I completely understand. It's something that I'm trying to work on, and honestly, it's something that you can never truly perfect due to the ever-changing game that is Rainbow Six Siege. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you and pretend that there's a secret formula to knowing when to do each. You just have to learn game sense and feel it out. Like I said, this is something that even I'm learning to this day. But if you want to advance onto how to do this at a base level, I can give it to you somewhat. Knowing which style of roaming to implement is dependent on three major key factors: the size of the map you're playing on, like I said earlier, also the pace of the round, and also the operator that you're playing. The size of the map that you're playing on is something that I've gone over multiple times in this video, so we can just skip that key factor. The second key factor being the pace of the round. Now, if you're on a big map, obviously playing for time is going to be your best option, and knowing when to implement that is going to be great as well. But if there's only two teammates on site and they're trying to roam clear you, stop roaming. Go to site. right? So the pace of the round heavily dictates whether you should even be roaming in the first place. Much more as well, how you're roaming. If it's a really, really fast-paced round, they're gunning really heavily, they have multiple drones on you, they're already trying to roam clear within the first 30 seconds of the round, you might need to call on a teammate and either hold it and be really aggressive, or just back off and play for time, and play for drones, and play for picks, right? So the pace of the round and the pace of the attackers, or how you're pacing them, also heavily dictates also heavily dictates which of the previous 3 tips that you're going to use the most. Now, the final key factor in knowing when to implement each 3 is going to be the operator that you're playing, like I said earlier. So if you want to waste time, naturally operators that are going to waste time are going to waste information, because if attackers want a fast-paced rush, they need the information in order to rush into a place so they don't die to a kid sitting in a corner, right? So anybody that wants to waste time naturally should be somebody who denies gadgets, like Mozzie, or Vigil, or Solus, or maybe even Caviera if you know that the only roam clear they're bringing is a Jackal. So the operator you're playing, like I said, can heavily dictate the playstyle of roaming that you do. I can give you another example. Let's say that you want to roam with somebody who is really good at getting kills, and they're specifically playing a lot of shield operators. Well, then you would roam with somebody like Legion, or somebody like Oryx, or somebody like Alibi, people who have utility that specialize in either getting kills like Oryx, or specialize in getting information on the attackers so that you can get kills like Legion and Alibi. Let's say that you want to hold space. People who hold space generally are people with utility that can slow attackers down. Operators like Legion, or anybody with impact grenades to trick walls or destroy OSA shields, or shield operators. Trap operators too do this very, very well. So like I said, the operator that you're playing can heavily dictate the style of roam that you do. So just to kind of wrap up this video, let's go over everything very, very shortly. There's 4 levels of roaming. The first being just going for kills. This is the stage that most new players are at, and if you want to do it, that's fine, but it's not the most efficient way to roam and the most helpful to your team. The second level of roaming is roaming for time. You can just waste as much time as possible because you're having to waste their time because they're trying to roam clear you. This looks like shooting a bunch of drones, maybe going for flanks, passively pre-firing, making your presence known so that when they try to roam clear you, you run away. Then there's the third level, which is even more complicated, and that is roaming for space. If you know that they need certain map control to take vert, or to go on the site, or to get a wall, you want to hold that map control, because as a roamer, you are the first line of defense that the attackers are going to get to before they even touch the anchors or touch the site. So you need to be that first line of defense and defend. Stop trying to attack and swing everything. And the fourth is implementing each 3 whenever it's needed, and having a mastery of all other 3 to combine into your own playstyle that you can make videos on, just like I did. But with that out of the way, that is completely it for this video. Again, the objective of roaming is just to help your team. So if you can find a way to help your team that even isn't in this video, then do that. But with that out of the way, my name's Alka. Check out this next video, and I hope I'll see you there. Later.